Paramahamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashtottara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Samveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanande Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. This morning we are reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, entitled The Glories of Devotional Service. And this morning we're reading from text 15. So we'll read the Sanskrit and call in response, and we can have a few devotees chant the verse as well after me, and then we'll read the translation and the purport. Chetaha kalvasya bandhaya muktaye chatmano matam guneshu saktam bandhaya ratam va pangsi muktaye chetaha kalvasya bandhaya Muktaye chatmano matam Guneshu saktam bandhaya Ratam vapangsi muktaye Chetaha kalvasya bandhaya Muktaye chatmano matam Guneshu saktam bandhaya Ratam vapangsi muktaye. So a few devotees. Please repeat after me. Chetaha, consciousness. Khalu, indeed. Asya, of him. Bandhaya, for bondage. Muktaye, for liberation. Cha, and. Atmanaha, of the living entity. Matam, is considered. Guneshu, in the three modes of nature. Saktam, attracted. Bandhaya, for conditional life. Ratam, attached. Va, or. Pungsi, in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Muktaye, for liberation. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the three modes of material nature is called conditional life. But when that same consciousness is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in the consciousness of liberation. Purport. There is a distinction here between Krishna consciousness and Maya consciousness. Guneshu, or Maya consciousness, involves attachment to the three material modes of nature, under which one works sometimes in goodness and knowledge, sometimes in passion, and sometimes in ignorance. These different qualitative activities, with the central attachment for material enjoyment, are the cause of one's conditional life. When the same chetaha, or consciousness, is transferred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, or when one becomes Krishna conscious, they are on the path of liberation. Again, the verse. The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the three modes of material nature is called conditional life. But when that same consciousness is attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in the consciousness of liberation. Om Agyantimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our daughter, who some of you have met. We took her when she was very young, I don't remember the exact age, but for her birthday we took her to a theme park called Universal Studios. This is a strange question to begin a Srimad Bhagavatam Katha with. But please raise your hand if you've been to Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. Oh, good. Half. Please raise your hands if you've been to Vrindavan in India. So about the same number of people have been to Vrindavan as Universal Studios. That's not the class, that's just for my own interest. But if you haven't been to Universal Studios, perhaps you've been to Disney World or Disneyland or some other theme park, yes? So we took our daughter to this theme park. I grew up very much a theme park kid. That was very fun for me. My wife, not so much. So together we were kind of navigating this with our daughter. It was her first experience. And I was very eager that we should ride all the rides that we possibly can, get the most out of the experience. And so as soon as we got to the theme park, I spotted there was one ride with a very short line. And if you know theme parks, the good strategy is you find the one with the shortest lines and you go. So we got on this ride, and it was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. This ride was called The Mummy. And I didn't check how old the child should be to go on the ride. And our daughter is tall for her age, so they let her go. So we got on this ride. It was her first ride in any kind of theme park. I don't remember, but she was young, maybe 7, 8, something like that. I think she had just turned 8, maybe, but had never been on any kind of ride like this. And the way that this ride works, I don't want to take up too much time going into this kind of mummy katha, but the way this ride works is you sit in the ride, and the story behind the ride is you're going through this excavation of the pyramids in ancient Egypt or something like that. And it takes you, it's a very nice, pleasant ride. But then what happens is suddenly someone has been on this ride. Yes, you've been on this ride? You know what happens next? What happens next? See, fathers always make this mistake. See, I didn't plant her here, but this is exactly what happened in my experience. The ride starts very pleasant, and everyone's thinking like, this is a nice little, little train ride or something. And then the story is the lights go out all of a sudden, and you hear this voice on the loudspeaker. Oh no, something's gone wrong. What's going on? And somehow, I guess the story is that the mummy has taken over the thing or the ride, and in the darkness, and the train starts going backwards, and it goes up and down, and this mummy comes out of nowhere and scares you, and of course it's a thrill ride. And so part of thrill rides is there's the story of something is going wrong, and the emotions get very heightened. That's the fun of a thrill ride. Yes? Everyone with me so far? I promise we're going to come back to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe. No, we'll come back to the Srimad Bhagavatam, I promise. I want to come back to New Vrindavan and be invited back, so we'll come back to it. But, what is your name? Nivedita. So like Nivedita, my daughter, whose name is Shruti was also she wasn't expecting that. And at that age, she also took it very seriously that, no, something is actually wrong, and the lights have gone off, and its mummy is taking over, and she was just so scared. She was so scared. So while everyone else is having fun on the ride, she's screaming, Papa, Papa, Daddy, right? So now, as a parent, what do you do in that situation? Some of you are parents, some of you may be like Nivedita, maybe you had this experience yourself as a child. So in that situation, what do you do? What does a parent do? What can a parent do in that situation? You're on the ride, you can't get off the ride. So what do you do? Pray? Someone said pray. That's usually a good answer in a Bhagavatam class. It's 9 times out of 10, that'll be the right answer. That wasn't exactly what I was thinking. But what do you do to, your child is very scared. You console them. So how do you console them? You assure them, you say, everything will be okay, everything will be okay. So you do a couple of things. You assure them, you say, everything's okay. You say, I'm here with you. Don't worry, I've got you, right? The child's really scared. What else might you do? They're thinking, no, this mummy is going to attack, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. So as a parent, one of the things that you might do as part of your consoling them, as part of your assuring them, is you might explain to them, no, it's not real. This is all make-believe. And you start explaining to them, look, see? You see, that's just it's not a real mummy, it's just like a robot or a doll or something. You can even show them, you start pointing out, look, you could see that it's not real. So why am I bringing this up right now? This is the natural role of a loving, consoling parent. They assure us, they tell us, I'm here with you. And maybe if we're in such a fearful condition, they may explain to us, look, there's nothing to be afraid of. Let me explain to you how this works. Why is the child afraid? Why was Nivedita afraid? Why was Shruti afraid? But Vrinda Kishori was on this ride, or some ride like this recently. You were also, okay, so not such a great example. But you were afraid, but did you start crying? So as adults, we're afraid, there's a thrill, but somewhere inside we understand, we know. But as a small child, you don't know. So the parent, as part of their consoling, as part of their reassuring, they can explain, this is how it works. There's nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, once you understand how it works, you can actually experience the ride and maybe even enjoy the ride, have fun. So the reason I'm beginning in this atypical way is I want to, sometimes when we hear verses like this or philosophy like this, we think this is very dry philosophy. But actually, if we can understand what is Lord Krishna doing, either directly, as here this is Kapila is one of the incarnations, the avatars of Krishna. So either directly, in this case, or like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna directly gives his reassurance, or sometimes through his his empowered devotees, great acharyas, they also give reassurance. But one of the ways they give reassurance is, of course they give reassurance, they say, I'm with you, don't be afraid. There's a very famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, don't be afraid to Nivedita on a roller coaster. Don't be afraid, Nivedita. Does anyone know which verse I'm thinking of? There are many verses like that, but there's one. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papibhyo mokshay shami ma shuchaha. Ma shuchaha means, one way of understanding it is, never fear, have no fear. Ma, no, shuchaha, fear, worry, anxiety, distress. So this is Krishna's reassurance. But also another way Krishna reassures us, and here Kapila Dev is reassuring us, is by explaining how things work. And so when we read verses like this, we can remember this is not just some dry abstract philosophy that, okay, there's these gunas, which we'll talk about what the gunas are, and there's this and that. But what's the point of all this? The point of all this is Krishna saying, look, my dear child, this is how the material world works. And if you understand how the material world works, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be an anxiety about. It's just like a make-believe roller coaster. Like Shruti and Nivedita and so many children and so many families, we've come to a theme park. We can call this theme park Maya Land. We've come to Maya Land in Orlando. I'm sure there's a Maya Land. There's every theme park imaginable in Orlando. So we've come to Maya Land. What is Maya Land? It's the amusement park of the material world. Maya, that which is not. In other words, everything is make-believe. There's no real mummy, but there's a make-believe mummy. There's no real, I don't know, what other, Space Mountain. You're not really in outer space, but it's all make-believe. It's a story. Like that Maya, everything around us looks and feels so real. And in one sense it is, but in another sense, it's not. Because we're taking this to be reality, but actually this is just a play of energy. This is just like a theme park. And unfortunately, we've come to this theme park, this Maya Land, and we've even forgotten that we've come to the theme park. Now I know this sounds weird, because Nivedita, she may have been scared on the ride. Well, maybe in that moment, Shruti and Nivedita and all the children, you forget for a moment at least that I'm even at a theme park, and you think it's so realistic. So like that, we've forgotten that we're even in a theme park. We've forgotten there's something called Maya Land, and we think, no, this is real life. This is all there is to reality. And so when there's something very frightening, we become so afraid that we start identifying with that fear. When there's something very exciting and happy, we become so overwhelmed by that happiness, that sukha, that we forget everything else. And they say, right, life is like a roller coaster. Why is a roller coaster thrilling? One of the reasons. What happens? It goes up and then it goes down. And the higher it goes, you know, those who are seasoned roller coaster riders, you know, as it's getting higher, you know, that much is going to be, you're going to come down. But if you forget you're even on a roller coaster, then you're going constantly up and down, and you're getting totally bewildered. So Krishna, in these different forms, in these different sacred texts and teachings, he's constantly lovingly reminding us. It's actually an act of love, just like a parent, right? They're not shaming the child. Oh, you're so stupid. You don't know this is a ride? What's wrong with you? No, it's not. It's, my dear child, you've forgotten. Let me remind you. I'm here. I'm with you. There's nothing to be afraid of. And also, let me show you how this works. In our dharmic philosophy, Vedic philosophy, what we today know as Hinduism, there are different frameworks for how things work. Usually in our tradition is known as Vedanta. So in Vedanta, there's different, some of you are familiar with Vedanta. In Vedanta, there's different frameworks to understand how this world works, how this roller coaster, how this theme park works. And I don't want to get too technical, but there's a similar school to Vedanta called Sankhya, and in Sankhya philosophy, especially, which this is what Kapila Dev is teaching in the Bhagavatam, this Sankhya philosophy, of course, ultimately he's teaching bhakti, but through the language of what's called Sankhya philosophy. And in Sankhya philosophy, the way that these great rishis and munis explain how the world works is they say, look, ultimately there's the supreme Bhagavan, Ishvara, the supreme personality of Godhead. The supreme personality of Godhead is the source of spirit and matter. Spirit is called Purusha. Does anyone know what matter is called in Sankhya philosophy? Prakriti. So Purusha, Prakriti. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I am the source of both. So Krishna, the Ishvara, is beyond Prakriti and Purusha because he's the creator of both. Anyway, Purusha is us, the spirit, the Atma. We're actually not part of the theme park machinery. We're the person sitting in the ride. Everything else, the whole theme park, is Prakriti. Does that make sense? I know it's a little technical, but that's Sankhya philosophy. Now, Sankhya philosophy, Sankhya literally means counting. So what they do is they say, okay, so if you really want to understand how this theme park works, let's take Prakriti and break it down even further so we can understand. And the way that they break down Prakriti is they say, look, Prakriti, around us, we see so many different things. There's so much diversity, isn't it? There's so much in this world. There's so much variety, so many different shapes and forms and things, right? Just bombarding our senses at all times. But these great rishis, munis, the shastra, the sacred text, they say, look, actually, there's a method to the madness. There's a way to understand how this machinery works. Prakriti is nothing but three energies that are just mixing and matching at all times. And these three energies are known as the gunas, Traigunya, the three gunas. In English, sometimes it's translated as the three modes of material nature. So that's what's being spoken about in this verse. We're using this framework called Traigunya, these three essential ingredients, building blocks of Prakriti. One way we can think about this, if this is helpful as an analogy, because you might be saying, well, that's a little weird and that's a little arbitrary. Why are there just three? There could be so many more. Well, one way of thinking about it is think about colors. Is anyone like an artist, a painter? Anyone like to do painting or anything? Yes? What is your name? Shri Rupa. So Shri Rupa, you're a painter. Yes? You like painting. So Shri Rupa, how many colors do you paint in? How many colors do you use when you paint? Infinite number of colors is possibly. But actually, if you think about all those colors, Shri Rupa, that you're using to paint, they're all coming, if I'm not mistaken, from three colors, right? There are three, what do we call them? The primary colors. What are the three primary colors? Yes, in the blue sweatshirt. Red, blue, and yellow. So in one sense, you can say, how many colors are there? There's so many, infinite number of colors and hues. Have you ever had to paint? Have you ever gone to a paint store and you look at those paint chips? And they all have these really poetic names. Sierra Mist, Desert Rose. There's so many, even in white. Have you ever had to paint a wall white? There's eggshell white, and this kind of white, and Eskimo snow white, and polar bear white. And there's so many intricate, but actually everything is just a play of red, blue, and yellow. So similarly, in Prakriti, in Maya land, there's so much variety. There's infinite, seemingly infinite variety, but actually they're all just a mix of these three primary, you can say, states of energy or qualities. And like red, yellow, blue, There are three of them, and they are known as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Or in English, sometimes it's translated, sattva is sometimes translated as sat, means true, reality, sometimes good, and tva means ness, so goodness, truthness, you could say, although usually we say, right, or state of knowledge. So here Srila Prabhupada translates it in the purport as goodness or knowledge. That's sattva, sattva good. And then there's the second, and we'll briefly describe each one. Rajas. Rajas is often translated as passion, great activity. Sometimes even creativity is passion, is rajas. And tamas is often translated as ignorance. But we can also say tamas is a state of, you can say it's like a state of darkness, ignorance, but also rest, groundedness. These gunas, by the way, they show up in so many things. If anyone is interested in Ayurveda, I'm not an expert by any means on Ayurveda, but in Ayurveda you find also, what is Ayurveda is an understanding of how these gunas work together and they form what's called a dosha, right? So how it affects your body physiologically, in art, in so many ways. But these are the three primary. Now, some things to know about these three primaries. Just like with colors, practically speaking in the material world, there's no such thing as an experience of any one of these in a pure state. There'll always be a mixture. Just like if you're painting, Sri Rupa, right? If you're painting, even if you paint something red, it's never going to be the primary color red. It'll always be red with some little tiny mixtures of the other two. So we'll never find in material world any one of the gunas in 100% isolated state. There'll always be some mixture. But also, just like with our painting example, there will always be one that predominates. And we'll talk in just a few minutes about why that's important to know. Because again, let's stay focused on why are we learning this? What is the point? Why are we talking about this? Right? Remember, what is Krishna trying to tell us? He's trying to teach us how this material nature works. And if we know how it works, we won't be as affected by it. So it's helpful to know how it works. So one of the ways that we can understand these gunas work is they're never in an isolated pure state, but one always predominates. Another way that we can understand it works is these gunas have an influence on us, and then we can carry them and we bring that influence to others. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then the last thing I'll say before we get into the details is all three are necessary. We need all three. Even though sometimes we talk about tamas, we say ignorance or darkness, and immediately we think, okay, tamas is bad and sattva is good, right? Goodness, ignorance. Okay, it's pretty clear, and rajas is somewhere in the middle. But actually, all three are necessary. And yet all three bind us. We saw this word comes up twice, right? Twice in this verse. Bandhaya, bound, conditioned. So we're conditioned, we're bound, we're somehow controlled by these gunas. Even though we need them all, the problem is we become controlled by them. A couple of years ago, it's a long story, but I was candle shopping. I know I tell the strangest stories of theme parks and candle shopping, but I was candle shopping, and I was in one of these stores that has lots and lots of different candles. I don't know if anyone is a connoisseur of candles, but there's all these different scented candles, and I found, I don't have it up on the screen, but if anyone's interested afterwards, I'll show you. I took a picture of it. But it was so interesting because I found on one shelf 3 candles, and I just snapped a picture of it. It was so interesting. So one, the candle, the scent, was called, and I'm not kidding, I'll show you the photo if you think I'm making this up. The scent was called whiskey and tobacco. So you can actually get a candle, and the smell of it evokes the smell of whiskey and tobacco. Now, almost next to it, I rearranged them so they were next to each other so I could take the picture, but not exactly. But right nearby, there was a candle, and it was called the scent of love. And it was like this bright red, scent of love. And then I found one that was like bluish, and it had a lotus flower on it, and it was called Tranquil Retreat. And I thought, right there, you have such an interesting illustration of the gunas. Why would someone buy a candle that smells like whiskey and tobacco? People buy it. They wouldn't make it if people didn't buy it. Why would you buy a candle that smells like whiskey and tobacco? Well, if we're trying to set the mood, maybe you want to have a party, maybe you have a little bar at home or something, right? I work at a college, so maybe some of the frat houses, fraternity houses, right? So you light that candle, and immediately it creates that mood. And for some people, especially if you are, I'm not asking anyone to volunteer, but if for you the smell of whiskey and tobacco is like a comfort smell, it evokes some pleasant memories of hanging out or going to a party, or right? As soon as you light that candle, that will evoke the mood. That will bring you into that mood. So the gunas are like that. They bring us into a certain mood. Even subtly, even without, you might not even know it. Someone else might light the candle, and then you smell it. Oh, suddenly I feel like doing this. And if you don't like that, if you're not used to it, maybe you get a headache, or you think, oh, I just feel I gotta get out of this place. Right? The scent of love. That's kind of a very rajasic kind of, right? If you want it, we even talk about this. Ooh, I want to evoke the mood of passion, right? Maybe you're celebrating a wedding anniversary, or it's date night or something. You want to, create a mood of attraction for your significant other, or your beloved. So you light that candle. Ooh, suddenly there's fragrances we associate with romance, with, right? Attraction and affection and sensuality. That's very rajasic, rajas. And then tranquil retreats. If you want to meditate, or if you want to create even a space, forget even if you don't want to meditate, but you want your home to smell to evoke ideas of peacefulness and calm and cleanliness, right? It's very clean smell, very crisp. So again, these things are subtle, but right there you can see an illustration of how something as subtle and simple as lighting a candle, it can evoke mood. It can affect our mood, and then we can affect others' moods with it. And like that, we don't have time, but we could do that with everything. We could do it with places. If you want to go study, where do you study? If you want to be effective, for most of us, if you want to study effectively, a library. So what is a library? A library is a place that's designed, everything about it is designed to evoke knowledge. The lighting, the way that right? If you went to that frat house and it's dark and they lit the whiskey and tobacco candle, you can still try to study there, but the mood will be a clash with your activity. But if you want to celebrate something, you want to just really party, the library is probably not the best choice. Yes? So places, smells, there's so many. Krishna gives so many examples in the Bhagavad Gita. The food that we eat affects our mood, and so we're affected by it. Not just our mood, but on a deeper level, our consciousness. And in this purport, Srila Prabhupada uses the word consciousness several times, and in the verse itself, Chetaha. On a deep level, our consciousness, now our consciousness is Purusha, our consciousness is that pure spirit, but when we become mixed with, when we interact with the material energy through these gunas, we're affected. And we're so affected that we may even forget that there's a separation between us and the gunas. Is everyone able to follow so far? Does that make sense? So knowing this can help us to become more aware, and therefore to recognize what the world around us is and what it's doing to us. So what can we do with that knowledge? How is that helpful? Beautiful. So one way we can use this knowledge, we can make better choices. If I know that things will impact me, just like the example of where to go to study, if I'm intentional about it, then I'm going to go, wait, this is a better location for me to study, so I'm going to go here. But if I don't even know Or if I'm ignorant, you can say, of the fact that the place matters, then it's like, I'll just go study anywhere. And then I'll wonder, wait, why didn't I do well on that exam? I don't know. I guess I'm just stupid. Or I guess the exam was unfair, or whatever, right? We won't really understand, but if we can understand, we can start making better choices, we can be more intentional. What else? How else might it be helpful? If we can understand that things are just this mix of different gunas, and some gunas are predominating and some are less. So one is we make intentional choices. What's another? So thank you. Yeah. So we can not only be intentional, but actually we can start to more consciously act, and our karma becomes better. We become more inclined towards better choices, better decisions, better actions, and karma always means action and reaction, and therefore it becomes like a feedback loop. So then we have better consequences, better reactions, and then we become habituated and we start growing, right? That's spiritual growth. Ultimately, we need all three, right? We need all three gunas. Why do we need tamas? Anyone know what's an activity that is predominantly tamas? Sleep. Sleep is actually predominantly a tamasic activity, right? If you think about it, it's a state of, we can say, ignorance, or a state of, right, our senses, everything is sort of dulled or shut down. But we need it, it's so essential. What about rajas? To work, to create, there'd be no art, there'd be no, right? Think of innovation and process. It requires a certain rajasic, and then without going into too much detail, right? But rajas predominates over even procreation. So especially for, right? For 99% of us in one sense, right? Very few of us will be called to a complete life of monasticism. For most of us, we need relationships, we need families, right? So rajas needs to be there. I mean, it's a side note, but sometimes in spiritual communities we think, well, we should just be spiritual and therefore I should be as lacking in any affection for my spouse or my family. But no, healthy families require, there needs to be some affection. Affection means there needs to be some rajas, there needs to be some passion. Even in a relation, there needs to be some kind of chemistry. So rajas is there. And then of course, there's so many sattvic activities we could think about, studying, learning, right? So all three are necessary, and yet if we can learn to be intentional, and sorry if this sounds a little abstract, but we can engage in even a tamasic activity or a rajasic activity in a more sattvic way. So sleep is a tamasic activity. No judgment, it's just categorically, it's an example of tamas. But is there better and worse sleep? Is there a way to sleep sattvically? Yeah. Right? Sleeping at a certain time, waking up at a certain time. I'm not a good example of it this morning, I overslept. But usually, right? If you see people who have very healthy lifestyles, almost invariably, even just from a material point of view, even just physically or whatever, invariably they have usually a set bedtime, a set time to wake up. Usually it tends to be earlier in the morning, right? How is our mind earlier in the morning? More productive, more clear, right? So sleep is a tamasic activity, but we can approach it in a sattvic way. Work is a rajasic activity, but we can approach it in a sattvic way. We can be as sattvic as possible within the realm of rajas, within the realm of tamas. We can also try to counteract our society, our society, particularly contemporary society right now, is so much amped up rajas and so much amped up tamas, especially now with our phones and, right? We're constantly connected to these screens. By the way, the act of staring at a screen, does anyone know what that is in terms of gunas? Just the physical act of looking at a screen, it's tamasic, actually. If you think, and even neuroscientists will tell you, what happens to your brain waves when you're looking at a screen? And then there's scrolling, right? So this mix of tamas, just being on screens, and then rajas, Have you, some of you have grown up probably as digital natives. You know what the average length of like a reel is now? Like a little a movie? Does anyone know? I think it's like under a minute. They're getting shorter and shorter. Why? Because our attention spans are shorter and shorter. I see the way my daughter scrolls through versus the way I scroll through. She's at a speed, and it's just like automatic. That's a very Rajasic approach. So just one example, and I'm not trying to say, down with smartphones and this and that. They're here to stay. But the point is, let's be intentional and recognize there's so much tamas and rajas in my life already. So let me introduce more and more sattva to balance it out. Right? So I can approach these activities in a sattvic way. I can try to intentionally introduce sattva. And sattva also is so helpful because it gives us clarity. Now, if we look at texts like this purport in the Bhagavad Gita also, so many places, it's very clear that the goal is not just to be sattvic. First of all, it's not even possible in this world to only be sattvic. But even if you could, the goal is not just to somehow be the most sattvic person you can. Ultimately, we have to transcend the gunas because we're Purusha, remember? And ultimately, beyond all of the gunas, beyond this Maya land, is our true parent, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ishvara. But to get to that point of transcendence, sattva is so helpful. Why? Because remember the qualities of sattva? What did we say the qualities of sattva were? Do you remember? Tranquility, knowledge, goodness. We might add also clarity. When you have a peaceful frame of mind, you can see things. So the more we're cultivating sattva, the more we're able to see clearly. You can think about this also like a window. Let's say you have a window, and the window has like a curtain or a blackout curtain on it. Will you be able to see outside? Not at all. Practically not at all. So we could think of tamas as like that. Tamas is such a strong covering that if we're living lives, again, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, but just if we introspect and I realize, hey, you know what? I have my life is really tamasic right now. And we're going to be very clouded. Our judgment is going to be very clouded. It's going to be like trying to look out of a window where there's a big shade or curtains drawn. So let's say we're able to lift that curtain. But now we see that there's like a translucent curtain. So you can sort of see outside of the window, but still there's something blocking. So that's maybe like a little bit like rajas. Like rajas is, okay, you get little glimpses of what's outside, but still there's so much passion, there's so much activity, there's so much intensity that it's still blocking my vision. So I may need to work at clearing that as well. And now I come to just the glass of the window pane, and maybe even I clean that glass so I get it as clean as possible. And now am I able to see outside? Now I'm able to see outside pretty well. And so we can think of sattva as that clean glass of the window that allows us to see outside. But the point is not just to sit inside and look through this glass and see outside. The point is we can actually, when we see what's outside, we can see what's awaiting us. We see our dear friend Krishna is waiting there saying, hey, come outside and play with me. And so then we can actually go. So sattva is like that clean window. It's not the goal itself, but for most of us, of course there's always the possibility that from wherever we are in our lives, Krishna can lift us up with his kripa, his grace. But for most of us, our part is cultivating intention, awareness, and then cultivating as much sattva as possible so that we can get a clear picture of our true home, of Krishna, of that divine parent who's reassuring us. So now going back to this in the purport and where we started with this amusement park analogy. Now if we look back and we look at this purport, although it seems very heavy in one sense, that Srila Prabhupada in this commentary, he's saying that basically it's, the choices between material consciousness, Maya consciousness, and Krishna consciousness. But we can see the real love and assurance that's there, saying, let's learn how this world works. And when we learn how this world works, then we can actually know there's really nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be in anxiety about. There's also nothing to be so overwhelmed with excitement and, right? So it goes both ways. But there's nothing that we can get, that we should be so overwhelmed by that we forget the big picture. What is the big picture, or who is the big picture? It's that we're not alone. That there is our dearest, well-wishing friend who's with us at all times, who's within our own hearts as Paramatma. And he's with us, and he's reassuring us constantly that through this roller coaster ups and downs of life, once we know how the system works, we can experience it. We might even enjoy the ride. Not that the point is to enjoy material life, but actually as devotees, in one sense, we can enjoy material life. And this is where, and we'll close here and I'll open it up for some questions, but this is where, even beyond just Sankhya philosophy, Vedanta philosophy, Bhakti has a very special message for us, this path of Krishna Bhakti. Because the point is not just to say, as sometimes the Gyanis do, that, oh, it's all illusion, this is how the world works, it's all the gunas, and therefore there's nothing real in this world. But from a Bhakti point of view, once we understand how things work, then we can appreciate who is the one that made this amusement park for us to begin with. It's Krishna. Who is the one that's behind everything, even the gunas? It's Krishna. The gunas are just servants of Krishna. They just have a role to play. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Prakriti, what is Prakriti? Prakriti, Krishna says that Prakriti is like the womb and I am the seed-giving father. So once we understand how, or we try to understand how this material world works, what the gunas are, how I can engage with the gunas in an intentional, healthy way, then not only am I no longer afraid, but then I can appreciate behind everything is the hand of Krishna. Behind everything in my life, when I'm at the highest point of the roller coaster, Krishna is with me. When I'm at the lowest point of the roller coaster, Krishna is with me. When I'm hurtling down and it feels like my life is just completely, I don't know what's going on. And by the way, this happens to devotees too. It's not that, somehow I put tilak and kantimala on and no more roller coaster. No, we have to go through everything. We're in the material world, but Krishna is there with me. And everything is a gift from Krishna. That is the vision that we can have. That is the vision that Srila Prabhupada speaks of so beautifully in this purport. That is, in simple terms, that is being conscious of Krishna all the time, or Krishna consciousness. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And if we have some time, I would love to hear some questions, thoughts, or comments.
Probably, thank you so much for this really enlightening class.
I'm sorry, it's a little hard to hear.
Hare Krishna. Is it okay? So I have a question. I'm really grateful to this message you spoke about today. So my question is, if we're trying to cultivate more sattva in our life, more goodness, what happens when we're on this path and we notice that we're fighting some forces in our lives that are coming from many lives previously? Things that they're playing in the background. You can't really understand where they're coming from, but they're pulling you down. And it seems like you're swimming upstream because it's a force that's like beyond you. But it's hard to understand how it got there. But I think because we talk about reincarnation, we know that we've lived before. So we're kind of suffering from past reactions. So how do we pray for mercy from the Vaishnavas in the Lord, or do we have to just work so hard to defeat it?
That's a really nice question. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying we feel that there are forces acting on us that maybe are coming from previous lives. Yes? And we feel overwhelmed, or we feel sort of pushed this way and that way by these sort of forces or inclinations or, right? So part of it is, again, going back to knowing how things work. If we, just the awareness of that, sometimes we take it for granted, but just even what you said, to be aware that, look, there might be things here from previous lifetimes, that's so freeing. It doesn't necessarily solve your immediate problem, your issue, but at least, right, just like when you say something out loud, when you acknowledge it, it takes some of the power, the hold away from you, right? So, wow, I'm experiencing a lot of anger, and maybe I have this anger problem. I just feel like, right? So as you vocalize it, as you articulate it, that itself is such a great thing because you're articulating it, you're aware of it, right? So it lessens its hold. And then there's practical things that we can do to work on those things. So first we can identify that what are those things we need to work on, and then we can work on them. So my understanding, again, maybe it's a little controversial, but my understanding is Krishna consciousness is not necessarily a substitute for working on what we need to work on. It's not that, okay, well, if so I'm just becoming a devotee or I've become a devotee, so I don't need to. But Krishna consciousness gives us the deepest and most complete picture of reality within which to do that work. Does that make sense? So the gunas are still acting on me, my inclinations from a previous life or even from within this life, maybe in our childhood, or right? These things are acting on me. I have a certain psycho-spiritual nature that may look different than the person sitting next to me, or may look even different than my partner, my friend. But the more I can know that about myself, the more I can work on that within this bigger picture of ultimately I'm spirit soul, I'm a fragment of Krishna, right? And so, does that make sense? Like, so I can do the work, but I don't have to take I can do the work without the work becoming my shelter. The work is not my ashraya. It's not that I'm going to fix myself and that'll create perfection. And if I don't work on myself and whatever, then I'll be a failure and all hope is lost. I do the work, but ultimately my shelter is Krishna. I'm doing my part. There's a story, there's many examples of this, but there's a story that my Guru Maharaj, Radhanath Swami, he tells in his autobiography, The Journey Home, that when he was younger, as part of his travels, he was staying in Barsana, and he was staying at the ashram of one Babaji there. And they got word that there was, I think it was like some kind of wild animal, maybe like it's like a tiger or something, yeah? Tiger, that was like roaming around in those jungles. I mean, at this time also Barsana was much less developed than it is now. And as I remember the story,